It is our pleasure today. We're doing a little different service where we've asked people to submit some questions and to ask the Revs. And I thought it would be a lot more fun. You guys get to hear me chat all the time. So I thought I'm going to invite my dear friend and colleague, Reverend Savanna Noelle, up from Seattle. And she graciously agreed to come up. Yeah. So we're just going to go with that. So again, if you're new here, I haven't welcomed our new first-timers or anybody yet. So please come, make sure you see Sandy. There she is. And welcome to our center. And this is Nirvana. This is Nirvana, because she's like Nirvana.
That's a new one. Hi, everybody.
Yeah,
Good
welcome.
morning. It's good to be back with you. I love this community. I say that every time because I want you to know that my heart is here, even though I'm down south.
Down south,
down
yes.
in the lower 48.
The lower 48,
or whatever
49. Okay, so this morning we're just going to kind of do a conversation. We've got some questions. I think Nancy, our slide magician, is going to put them up there for us. And I believe the first question that we have, and even if they're not up, I know most of them, is, so Savanna, let's start with you. And what drew you to be a minister?
Okay. When I was talking to Tamara about this yesterday, it was a really long story, so I'm not going to share the whole story. But I'll just say that I came into this teaching at 16 years old, so I was quite young, and did a ton of work with youth all over the world. And my very first speaking engagement was at a Sillamar conference grounds in Monterey, California. Have any of you been there? It's incredibly beautiful, right on the ocean. It's actually one of the places that Ernest Holmes used to go on retreat, and that's actually also where he gave his famous Sermon by the Sea that you can find in the Science Mind textbook. And the very first stage I ever took in this vein, like as a public speaker, I was 19, 20 years old, and I got on stage, did my talk. That was when Reverend Michael Beckwith was still involved with Centers for Spiritual Living, and he was in the back of the room. And I did the talk, and then I actually sang as well, which was so fun. And he came backstage. It was one of those defining moments of my life where you never forget it. He walked backstage afterwards, and he put his hands on my shoulders, and he said, "You are going to be great. You have something within you. And I'm in your corner. I'll always be in your corner." And he said, "Have you ever thought about ministry?" And then I laughed, of course, because many people had said, "Have you ever thought about ministry?" And then after that, my mother was so inspired that she decided to go into ministerial school. And so I watched her go through this 5-year, program of school. And so happened another conference I went to, same place. Dr. Reverend Christian Sorensen, who is out of Seaside Center for Spiritual Living in San Diego, he started ministry at 24 years of age. And he was sitting with me this particular time, and he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about going into ministry?" And I'm like, everybody's asking me this. And I said, at the time, I think I was finishing up college. And I said, for young people like myself, the application itself is $600. And the cost of this program is extensive. Is there anything we could do to make that work? I said, because that's, for me at that point, it was college, I was paying for school. Going into ministry wasn't an easy thing. And so, of course, as life and the universe has it, he looked at me and he said, "Savanna, just take one class. Just take one class and then report back to me and see how you feel." And of course, I took one class, I did the application fees, and I never stopped. So, yeah, that's how I got into it.
Nice. And that just continued on, and here you are now.
And here I am now. That's a much bigger story.
That's a bit, yeah.
When you're called, you just feel it, There's something that's pulling you.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I know mine was, the congregation here has heard my story a little bit, But I was soul searching, and I had been doing some work with a group out of Seattle, the Edgar Casey group, and was feeling like I wanted to know more. I wanted to learn more, and it was just something deep within me. And it started actually when I was 5. I would this was the day that you could get yourself dressed, go out on your own, walk to Sunday school. Your parents are still sleeping. They don't even know where you are. And I would come back. And so it's been something prevalent in my whole life. And I just never found my home, so to speak. And so I started church shopping. And I had a good friend who had found Reverend Terry here at the Center for Spiritual Living White Rock. And he said, come listen to this guy. I think he talks our language. I think you're going to find that it works for you. So I showed up, and sure enough, I was like, oh, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. And I mean, I'd been to the big mega churches, and the kids loved the mega churches because they had the rock bands, they had the slushy machine, the pool tables, and this was a little different. And but it resonated with me. That resonated with me, that fact that there was no heaven, hell, that God was within me. It wasn't somebody I had to pray outside to. And I'm not saying, there's that piece that you're going, how can God be within us? But it was just knowing that innate truth, that it is that center, that soul piece that's right here, that spirit piece, sorry, because we're going to answer that question later. And then I was listening to Reverend Terry talk, and sure enough, practitioner classes came up, and I was sitting on my hands going, nope, not going to do it, nope. And next thing I knew, my hand was going up. And they were like, oh, we need a board member. And next thing I knew, my other hand was up. And then we started practitioner classes. And in the middle of it, I was sitting and I was listening to one talk with Reverend Terry. And all of a sudden, I just had this kind of out-of-body experience where I saw my head on Terry's body. I know. It was quite the sight, let me tell you. I know, right? And so I was like, oh, maybe there's something more here. And that's just when I know, when I wanted to be a minister. And, when my husband will tell you, he always laughs. He goes, because we've been married 33 years now, and this was not a career that he ever pictured me with. And but it was just something that's in me that I just can't not talk about this teaching, not talk to people about this, and share my love of the divine and my love of this teaching. So it's just like you said, my husband says, can't you turn it off one Sunday? I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way, honey. It's every Sunday. So yeah, that is how I got into it. And I think, so that is me. Oh, I asked the wrong question first, but okay, so how about this one? How would I explain the science of mind to a friend who's new? What do you think, Savanna? What's
I'm going first.
You're going first, I know.
Is the volume all the way up on this?
It's
okay.
Quite loud.
So this one's an interesting one because I think wouldn't you guys say this is one of the things people ask you the most when you come to a center? They're like, well, what is that? What do you believe? And you're like, oh gosh, how do I explain this? For me, it's been kind of an evolution, and it really just depends on who I'm talking to, the audience I'm speaking to. Do I have any context of this crowd? If I'm in a room of clergy, then the use of jargon is important. But if I'm in a room, let's say, my past experience has primarily been internationally. If I'm talking to a group of people, say in Ukraine, which is where I was working, I couldn't use terms like consciousness, God even. And so I had to really try to find a way to bridge and connect to what is the thing that people would resonate with. And so these days, the way I explain it, since I know that the word reverend is such a loaded term in the world, people assume all sorts of things about me because of that. And so really, I just describe it and talk about it as a way of life, as a set of principles and a philosophy that enhances life, that allows people to thrive and to come to know themselves on a much deeper level, and if I don't use the term God, something greater than themselves. That it's all about understanding self so that we in turn understand our place in the world and, in life. And I also, depending on the audience, might say, hey, have you ever heard of that Tony Robbins guy? Have you heard of Deepak Chopra? Have you heard of meditation? Have you heard, and I'll say it's kind of like a blending of all of these things, but it really puts the responsibility of the life that we're creating on the individual so that there's no separation. It's not about me needing to get to heaven through a deity or through Jesus the Christ or through anything but my own individual mind and intentionality. And so that's a really long answer, isn't it? So when they ask us this question on our oral panels, they'll typically say, like, how would you explain the science of mind in like 2 sentences? Do you think we could do it?
I think so. I think it's just one word. But we're ministers, right? We never say anything in 2 sentences.
Well, I know, Tamara, you're going to add to this. I think it's important to just make it, instead of way up here for people, we bring it down to here of how does this impact my life? It's a way of life. It's a way of positive and empowering living that puts the responsibility into my hands to know that I can create the life that I truly desire and want. And it's a means to do that. And it doesn't mean it takes away from your religious belief. It's a supplement. It's an addition to what you already have.
It's many paths to the one. And that is what, for me, it's all about oneness, that unity of life. And I loved yesterday, I took Savanna to Jericho Beach, and we were sitting and talking about the questions and what did we want to say. And I liked, when we were talking about this question especially, she says, have you ever noticed when people are starting to talk about science of mind, they say, well, we're not Scientology, we're not Christian Science, we're not occults, so we start with what we're not rather than what we are. And that thing that we are is exactly what it says on the very front of my tattered book that I need to rebind. We are a philosophy, a faith, a way of life. And it is all based in unity and oneness and love. Almost 2 sentences, Dick. Almost. So for me, that is really what it is. And it's the thing with our teaching now is I always say that it's not, we are considered new thought, but actually we're old thought. Life has caught up to us. Life has changed so much that our teaching that we teach is out there everywhere that we look, with Deepak Chopra, with Wayne Dyer, who was a science of mind minister, or he trained, and the same with Louise Hay. But it is out there further than what we know. And Michael Beckwith was one. So there's lots of people out there who've done the training, but they just don't necessarily maybe call it science of mind. So it's always good to say, well, you've ever heard of this guy? Like, I love what you said.
Yeah, and also you'll see it in mainstream media now more than ever. Reverend, actually, Marianne Williamson, who was running for president in the U.S., she trained in A Course in Miracles, but she also is, trained in Science of Mind, a new thought as well. Yeah. I've been on a few calls with her where she's like, hey, can you guys do a treatment for me? So people speak the lingo or they don't, and it's just kind of hidden in mainstream in so many ways. And I think that when you've been in this teaching long enough, it becomes just a way of life, right? It's just who you are. I no longer have to necessarily use the jargon. It just shows up as who Savanna is in the world, right? I'm sure you can relate.
I think it's walking our talk. It's what we believe. It's understanding it to the point that we can understand it. Because, sometimes reading this big book is difficult. The language is old. The language is so different. So it's just getting it to our own understanding. And wherever you are with that understanding is okay. Right? There's so many paths, there's so many ways to keep looking at life that we keep evolving and growing throughout. So I think, yeah. Hopefully that answers that question. So the next one is, and I think you've answered this in some way, have classes transformed you or your thinking or your way of life? And I'm going to answer that one first. I'm going to go with it. Well, because the answer, Savanna has already touched on it, but classes are really where you get down to the meat and bones, the meat and, what is it? The meat and potatoes of our teaching. And the thing is, that's where you can, I've found, I'm going to use I language. Liv, if you're listening, I'm using my I language. That is where I've connected with most people. That is where I have learned the most, dug in, and it's not necessarily the teacher who's taught me it, it's my classmates. It's the people that I'm talking to. It's the after chat. It is the time that we call each other and say, did you understand what, at the time, most of my classes have been with Reverend Terry and Reverend Michelle out of that. Did you understand what they were talking about? And I'd be like, well, this is what I think, maybe. And then we'd talk about it and come to that deeper understanding. And I think that is the beauty of classes. It's the connection, it's the community, it is the transformation that happens within the class. And that is my answer. Your turn.
Yeah, I would say classes saved me. You know, when I was in ministerial school, I recall being resistant every single time I had to get in my car to go to class. And at the time, I think I lived at home, and my mom would say, because she had already gone through it as a minister, so she would say, Savanna, just show up. And the reason I had resistance about it was because I knew that I was going to have to grow. I knew I was going to be uncomfortable. I knew I was going to be out of my comfort zone. I knew it was going to stretch me in ways that maybe I didn't think I was ready for. And yet, every single time I would get to class, I would feel excited and happy that I did it. And of course, there was a lot. As you said, it's like the inner workings of stuff. I have a friend who has been in this teaching for a really long time, and he's always just sat and listened and absorbed it, which you will absorb it. Your consciousness will absorb all of the things. You know, they say that the 5 people we surround ourselves with, the most we start to become. So, of course, your feedback loop and the orbits you're in matter. Yet he would say to me time and time again over all these years, why am I not transforming? Why is this issue still showing up? Why, you know, am I living in drama and trauma in my life? And I come here on Sunday morning and I get fed. And I'm like, because you're not doing the work, in the inner work. And classes facilitate that. The classes, I think, are the thing that allow us to really do the work and look at ourselves and go, okay, is this the life I really want? What else is calling me forward? And what do I have to do internally to get from here to here, to stop suffering and stop being in resistance and stop being in pain and self-doubt and self-sabotage? And yet, and it's funny because every time I offer a class, he'll like dip his toes in and he'll say, so I think maybe I should take that class. And what does he do? He never takes it. No. So we continue to get the same feedback loop because of that. And so, I mean, I would say that classes have been the most transformational part other than just the Sunday morning, because it allows you to take this out into the world and to really do the work on yourself. I mean, I think everyone in here, your lives can be a testament to that, of what works and what doesn't. And the classes, again, they just enhance us. Yep. So take a class.
Yeah, I've talked to the people who are in class right now doing our visioning class. It's been phenomenal, learning and deepening our understanding. And I know each time I teach a class or work with a group, I learn more myself. And that's the thing. It's just being in that space of being willingness. I think, Nancy, there's another slide. Oh, yep. It's going. Well, Savanna, this is a perfect question, because you almost were touching on that. What do you recommend if your spiritual mind you've been doing your spiritual mind treatments and you don't see a demonstration? What would you recommend? So I'll give you a little context with this question because it was written differently. Was we just did 40 days of prayer together. So we had 22 people participating, praying every day. We would do check-ins. So they had set their intention. We'd be praying for a few days on each section that they wanted to. So, and then they showed their gratitude, they moved their feet, but they were still feeling that it just wasn't showing up the way they wanted. So how would you respond to that?
When Tamara first asked me this yesterday, I was like, I want to know what our practitioners would say. So I will just speak from just my own life and my own experience, in that oftentimes we don't get what we want in the time that we get it because there's something else that we're supposed to learn in that void, in that time. Ernest Holmes talks in the textbook a lot about prayers, like praying without ceasing. But it doesn't mean that it's always going to happen in our time, because that egoic, nature of us wants it now, and we want to have the thing in our periphery now. And yet sometimes I find in my life that what's being called forth is actually patience and something else that I'm supposed to learn before I get the thing. And the other piece of that too is that, and I think we touched on this when we were having this discussion, is that there's that treat and move your feet. There's also the quote of fake it until you make it. But I do think there's something to be said about consciousness being cause, meaning that there's energy and intentionality behind our thought and our belief systems. And so if I'm praying for something that I desire, and yet I don't feel fully deserving or worthy of the thing that I want, it might not show up in my experience because I haven't integrated it into my consciousness. So there's that idea that, we could get all quantum physics on you, but I don't want to do that. But there's the idea that we must become a vibrational match to the thing that we want. And what that means is that when you're praying, you're not just praying words, you're praying from feeling and emotion. So there's an emotion behind the prayer. If you ever listen to Dr. Michael Beckwith speak or pray, you just feel so moved after his prayers because they are so filled with emotion and intention and expectancy of goodness. But if we have any sense of limitation and lack and separation and I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy of this thing, then there's a dissonance, I think. There's some more work there, and work being a positive thing. There's some stuff there, I think, for us to look at, of like, well, do I really feel worthy of having that thing? Or am I just praying and then saying, well, this doesn't work? Mm-hmm. So then, of course, the brain, as it does, will go look for evidence to prove the thing that we believe is true. So if I believe I'm unworthy of having the thing, and yet I'm praying and my practitioner's praying, and yet I still don't believe I deserve it, then I will go look for evidence to prove that I can't have it. And then I can come to Tamara and say, see, this stuff doesn't work.
Yep. You don't know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
lady, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that changing and shifting our belief. And it's that underneath piece, that consciousness sometimes that we're the unconscious. There might be a belief that we've been through our what Ernest Holmes calls as race consciousness. So it's those thoughts and beliefs that are kind of out there, things that we've inherited in our life. Maybe somebody, I can say one time somebody in my family said to me, why do you do this? Like nobody else does. So then there was that little voice in the back of my head that went, oh, why, what? And then I started questioning myself. So it was then I had to start doing the work of uncovering what that belief really was about. And was that somebody else's belief or was that actually mine? So, but you have to, when you have your belief, but you also have to change your behavior. And it's about, okay, so what am I going to do when I'm telling myself that crazy story that you're not worthy, you're not good enough? Then I stop and go, okay, who's speaking here? And I have that little, well, I'm not allowed to swear, am I? No, I have a little committee in my head. that is tells me all these negative things, you know, this little committee that goes around and keeps telling me these stories, and it's like, no, stop. I know this is not true. And if I can't remember that it's not true because I'm so deep into the forest and in the middle of all the trees, I always get that quote wrong, that's when I call Georgia, I call Diane, I call Savanna, I call Tara, I call my practitioners, and I say, okay, something is going on here. We need to uncover this. You've got to help me. And then we do the work with it. And that's what I love. This whole teaching is about our own accountability for our life. It is about what am I willing? I loved when you were saying something about your friend not coming to classes. I was thinking about the definition of insanity. Keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, sometimes my stories I keep telling myself are that same thing, and I keep listening to them and expecting a different result. So it's like, hold it. No, I am not listening anymore. I am making a change. I am changing my behavior. When I go into my meditation, I go to prayer, I call a practitioner. It's just whatever that is in that day that works for me. And you know what? Some days it's different. And some days I do sit and wallow. I sit and wallow for a day and still that little self-pity, and then it's like, okay, I've had enough of this. let's move on. Because you have to also feel it to heal it. There is that part too in this. So it's uncovering those hidden beliefs, do our work to find where we can heal those places that are broken and hurt. And it's not spiritual bypassing it, people. It is not putting on our rose-colored glasses and saying, oh, I'm spiritual, it's all be fine, it'll all work better now. It's not that. It's actually taking the time to nourish your soul, to get in touch with that divine source that's right here. And we all have our own answers. We do. It's just, do we listen? Do we listen? And the other thing I want to say about this topic was sometimes when I'm expecting it, and I'm in that, I love that you use the word expectancy. It's to be in expectancy of what is going to come. And it's not missing the little things, right? I'm just going to use a really random thing, and you've heard me use this before, that red car. But that's really not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for freedom when I drive that red car, how I feel when I'm driving it. Maybe it's a convertible, so then the top is down and my hair is blowing, whatever it is. So it's that feeling that I'm looking for and not the red car. But then I don't notice when a friend calls me and says, let's go for a hike. Or I don't, and that's a demonstration because I'm out in nature feeling that wind in my hair or whatever it is, that freedom. Or it's when, even my son calls and smiles at me. There's that moment that you're just like, right? It's those little things, and sometimes I discount those little things because I'm looking for that big thing. I'm expecting it rather than being in the expectancy of those little things. That's the end of that. That's all I've got to say. This was a good one. We talked a lot about, and we're like, I did want to, I didn't do it. The soul and spirit. How do you differentiate soul and spirit? Because you've heard me, I used soul, spirit, in between. So what is that? What is the difference? And I mean, we do have the big book, and you can look in the glossary. There is that. But what is soul and spirit to you, Savanna?
Well, first, show of hands. How many of you have seen the Science of Mind symbol? Raise of hands. Okay. So those who've seen the Science of Mind symbol, have you heard of spirit, soul, body? Yes? Okay. I just need to know. See, you got to know who you're working with. Yeah. Otherwise, this is going to be way over our heads. So this one I think sometimes is confusing in a academic student setting, and I will just put out there right now that I'm not a theologian, although I have studied this book here, and it's pretty dense and also amazing at the same time. But basically, if I had an easel up here, I would draw a circle, and in the circle there would be a V, and it would be split into 3 parts. Thank you, Diane. And at the top of that circle would be the representation of spirit, and that represents our conscious mind, thought. We would also say first cause. This is where spirit goes. This is where thought, intentionality are. And then if you look at that middle section, that is where soul is. This is teaching. Soul is the creative soil. This is where we plant our thought and our intentions into, if you think of like a seed that goes into the soil and then a plant grows. And Ernest Holmes has this amazing, he has, in the textbook, he has different diagrams that represent different things to help you understand this. And then the lower section is body manifestation. And so if we can think of this as spirit, first cause, God, the energy of life that we are thinking, it comes into form by means of what we call soul. And the soul is the universal law. This is all jargon. But if you really look into it deeply, you'll start to see that it's all connected. Yeah. So, I mean, gosh. Yeah, lots of words here. Yeah. So soul, let me just see. The creative medium, the feminine, the immaterial, it's the subconscious mind, which is why we say that your belief system is so important. What you believe about anything and what you think about the most, you will bring into your experience by means of what we call the soul. And so we were talking about this in terms of like why it's so confusing, because we think of it, if you think of it in a Judeo-Christian sense of mind, body, spirit, or we talk about the soul has left the body, right? It can be kind of confusing because we think, well, aren't spirit and soul the same things? But when we think about it, I believe, in the creative process, when we're thinking of what we're creating in our lives, Ernest Holmes talks about soul as the law of mind, of that creative infinite. It's the place where infinite possibilities exist. It's like this fertile ground. To me, it's like the void also. Yeah. You want to add to that?
No.
Is this making, okay, before we move on, is this making sense?
A little bit?
Any questions about that? Because I know it's a little dense. It's like, what?
Yeah, and so spirit, like he says here.
She has a question in the back.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, spirit is, so the circle, the whole thing is spirit. Thank you. That is a great question to ask, because there is the circle, but spirit is the circle. Spirit is everything outside of the circle. It is all things, right? It's all oneness. So that is a really great way to put it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's good. But it's spirit is, just think of spirit as that divine, that omnipresent, that is all around us. And that's why it's in the circle and it's outside the circle. And we just use it in our creative process.
And it's also why we say that we're a teaching that is open at the top. So if you look at the V, you will notice that it is open. That's the reason. So Rumi said, there are many ways to kiss the ground. It's that same idea. There are many paths, but it's all, the circle represents the wholeness and the unity of all of life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's so true.
Which I think is what attracts a lot of people to this, honestly. Because so many, I believe, were taught in hell and sin and damnation and separation, and then we're all wounded from it, and then we all washed up to the shores of a place like this. And we're like, oh my gosh, finally, something that resonates to tell me that I am whole. Mm-hmm. That there is a perfection in all of it, because it's all part of this one as the universal spirit.
Yep. Perfect.
Yeah, we just did a Science Mind class up here.
Yeah, we did.
A little one.
A little one. I know we're starting to run short on time, but I do want to touch on this one question, and we'll keep it as brief as we can keep it. But based on the teachings of Ernest Holmes, what has been said, what has been his stand on the rights and diversity of groups? So the person who asked the question was asking about the LGBTQIA2 community. So what has Ernest Holmes thought about that? And I loved your answer that you gave me yesterday on that. So yeah, if you want to go with that, that would be great.
So Ernest Holmes, if we think about the time period that he lived on the East Coast, and he was living in what is,
New York, wasn't he, or LA?
yeah, but what is
Oh,
that
the
area?
New England.
Yeah. If we think about that time period, the LGBTQ community wasn't something that could be talked about. So it didn't mean that it didn't exist, that there, weren't people in his communities that are part of this community. However, he couldn't talk about it. I mean, if you think about that period of time, same as like during the Martin Luther King era, Ernest Holmes took stands for, and we can talk about this too, for fighting against racism and human rights. But because it wasn't if you think about the collective consciousness at that moment, he didn't speak to it. But that didn't mean that it wasn't, that he didn't support it.
Yeah.
If it had been an issue in his day. And I think the way I was speaking to you about it in my own experience is many years ago, I would say 20 years ago, my first trip to Ukraine. So I spent a period of 11 years working at our Science of Mind community in Ukraine. And I remember one particular conference, the minister there, who's actually Canadian, Ukrainian, she had someone in her congregation who wanted to come out in the community but could not. Because if you know the history of Ukraine and communism and the former Soviet Union and all of those things, depending on where you are in the world, it's not safe to do that. And so even within our Science of Mind community in Ukraine, this lady did not feel comfortable coming out because she was afraid of being judged by her peers, even within this teaching. And so I remember Reverend Barbara brought in a minister from the States who was in our delegation, who could come and speak to her, who identifies as a lesbian, and was like, I would like to talk to her to make her feel welcome and to give her some support. And I'll never forget that, because I thought, this is an all-inclusive teaching. We're teaching it in this part of the world. Why are they not able to come out in this way? And, it's the same when I lived in Egypt. I couldn't talk about certain things in Cairo because of fear of what could happen, like even in our Science Mind community in Ukraine, I couldn't say words like God. I couldn't use words that, how would you say it? Because of the former KGB influence, we would have them in our classes and they would look at our materials, and then we'd get sued and our 501c3 status would be, threatened. So it's stuff like that where it was like, it's not that we don't support it, it's can we speak to it at this degree. And I think that community is much more open now, because that was 20 years ago. But I mean, look at our, the North America, like it's taken us some time.
It's taken us a lot of time. And the thing is, too, Ernest Holmes, we can speak more, what he was dealing with more in that day when he wrote this book was more about racism. And there were, in the Science of Mind magazine, there would be a list of all the centers. And beside the centers, it would say colored. Right? And he said, no. And he went to the colored churches. I'm using incorrect language. I apologize if I'm not meaning to offend anybody, just using the language from that point. But he went to those communities and showed up in support and worked with Martin Luther, or did he, I think...
I don't know that he directly worked with Martin Luther King, but
there was
some of the people from Unity...
yes.
Howard Thurman, there's another name, and I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah.
They worked through that, and that's the thing. So, and what I loved yesterday in our conversation, so I said, okay, so how do we, if we can't talk about it, we can't do this, or we're afraid, or right now, that's not an answer either. We can't just be uncomfortable just because it's uncomfortable. And I know in certain places of the world, especially the Ukraine, like they would be killed if they talked about it or did that. So, but what can we do then? And what Savanna told me is, Dr. Barbara, she said, what we can do is we can stand for peace. We can stand for oneness. And that is how I think approaching our communities, approaching any diversity, any situation, there's lots of things happening in the world right now that need our help in creating more peace in the world. So let's stand for peace. It doesn't matter color, gender, race. You know, everybody is important. Everybody has a voice. Everybody has something to offer this world because we are all unique individuals of that one. We are all part of that. We are all one with that one. So if we do have anybody in our community that feels unwelcome because of that, I apologize, and I just want everybody to know that we are here. We are here for you, and we will stand with you. We will be an ally, definite ally. And I had a young person, I don't know if people remember, came and they were doing their religious degree, and they needed to go and sit in a talk at a different style church. And they said to me when they were doing it that our church was the only one, our center was the only one that seemed to be friendly towards all people. They were afraid to go to some others. They were transgender and they felt uncomfortable. So they wrote a paper based on that, and that was why they chose our center. So I think it's just great to be as welcoming as we can. So I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody's questions, but we are way over time. So I'm going to say thank you for all the questions. And I think we can do this again. I've got Reverend Terry coming and doing a similar format in August. So yeah, it will be fun. So thank you for your questions.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.